Breaking Bad gave us some of the most terrifying villains in television history: cartel enforcers, corporate psychopaths, neo-Nazi warlords, and one high school chemistry teacher who turned out to be worse than all of them. Over 5 seasons, each new antagonist raised the stakes and pushed Walter White deeper into a world he was never supposed to survive. Let's start with the first real monster Walt ever had to face: Tuco Salamanca. Before Walter White ever met a criminal mastermind, before he ever sat across from someone playing 4D chess with the drug trade, he met Tuco Salamanca. And Tuco wasn't playing chess. Tuco was flipping the board, snorting something off of it, and then beating someone to death with one of the pieces. Here's the thing about Tuco. He's technically a businessman. He's a high-level distributor for the Juarez cartel, the guy responsible for founding the Salamanca family's entire meth operation in New Mexico. On paper, that sounds like someone who runs spreadsheets and takes meetings. In reality, every interaction with this man feels like you're about 4 seconds away from getting your skull caved in. His violence isn't strategic, it's fueled by whatever he snorted 20 minutes ago and whatever emotion happens to be ricocheting around his brain at that particular moment. He beat his own associate No-Doz nearly to death because the guy said the wrong thing at the wrong time, and this is the person Walter White, a 50-year-old chemistry teacher with khakis and a mortgage, decides to do business with. But Walt doesn't just walk in and hand over a bag of meth like a delivery driver. He walks in with fulminated mercury disguised as crystal, throws a piece at the floor, and blows out an entire window. Tuco's guys are on the ground, and Walt, standing there in the smoke, negotiates a better deal. That moment is the foreshadowing for his entire villain arc, gift wrapped in a bag of fake meth and a chemistry lesson nobody asked for. It's the first time he weaponizes his chemistry not to cook drugs but to intimidate, and it works, which is honestly worse because it teaches him that it will always work. Tuco doesn't stay a business partner for long. He abducts Walt and Jesse, drags them to a remote desert shack, and starts spiraling between "I'm taking you to Mexico as my personal cooks and I might just kill you both right now." The guy changes his mind about murder like most people change their mind about lunch. And it's only because Hank Schrader, following a completely separate lead, stumbles onto the location that Tuco dies in a shootout at all. One of the first major collisions between law enforcement and the cartel, and it happens almost by accident. Here's what makes Tuco so important though. He barely lasts 2 seasons. His screen time is tiny. But he's the reason everything escalates. Before Tuco, Walt and Jesse are cooking meth in an RV and selling it to people they went to high school with. After Tuco, they're in the orbit of transnational organized crime. The stakes go from "we might get arrested" to "we might get dissolved in acid." He's the gateway, the first domino, the proof that this world doesn't negotiate politely, and if you want in, you better be willing to blow up a building to make your point. And Walt was. But if Tuco was the loud, unhinged introduction to the Salamanca family, wait until you meet the one who couldn't even speak, and was somehow twice as terrifying. Hector Tio Salamanca. Here's something that shouldn't make any sense. The most physically powerless character in all of Breaking Bad commits one of the single most devastating acts of violence in the entire series. A man who can't walk, can't talk, can't feed himself, and communicates exclusively through one tiny bell on his wheelchair. And he uses that bell to kill the most dangerous drug lord in the American Southwest. Hector Salamanca is the patriarch of the Salamanca family, uncle to Tuco, uncle to the cousins, and a former high-ranking enforcer in the Juarez cartel. In his prime, this man was terrifying. But by the time we meet him in Breaking Bad, a debilitating stroke has stripped him of everything. He's confined to a wheelchair in a nursing home. His entire range of communication has been reduced to facial expressions and one bell, which his nephew Lalo physically tied to the armrest of his chair. Just a small practical gesture to help an old man signal when he needed something. Remember that detail, because despite being completely trapped inside his own body, Hector refuses to break. When the DEA comes to question him about Tuco's activities, he just rings that bell furiously, staring them down with pure contempt. Zero information, zero compromise. The man can't form a single syllable, and he's still somehow the most defiant person in the room, which is, unsettling, but here's where it gets dark. Walter White, desperate to kill Gus Fring and running out of options, realizes something. Hector hates Gus more than he hates anyone else alive. The Fring-Salamanca feud has been simmering for decades, and Hector has watched Gus systematically dismantle his family's empire, one relative at a time. So Walt approaches him with a plan, a bomb, hidden in his wheelchair, triggered by the bell. The same bell Lalo tied there to help his uncle communicate, and Hector says yes, not with words, with his eyes. He agrees to a suicide attack because killing Gus Fring matters more to him than continuing to live. That's not desperation. That's decades of hatred distilled into one irreversible decision. The scene itself is almost unbearable. Gus walks into Hector's room, suspicious but confident. Hector looks up, and for the first time, there's something different in his expression. not fear, satisfaction. He starts ringing that bell, not to communicate, not to call for help. He rings it to detonate a pipe bomb strapped to his chair. The explosion rips through the room. Hector dies instantly. Gus steps out, straightens his tie, and the camera pans to reveal half his face has been blown clean off. He takes 2 steps. Then he drops. And here's the thing that makes this moment genuinely brilliant. Every single time Hector rang that bell across the series, it was a quirky character detail. Darkly funny even. An old cartel boss reduced to dinging a little bell, but in hindsight, every ring was foreshadowing. The bell was never just a communication tool. It was always a potential weapon. The show just trained you to see it as harmless first. Hector Salamanca weaponized his own disability. He sat in that chair for years, waiting for the right moment to turn his helplessness into the deadliest thing in the room. And the scariest part? It worked. But if Hector is terrifying alone in a wheelchair, wait until you meet the 2 family members who did his killing when he still had legs to stand on. Leonel and Marcos Salamanca, the cousins. Most villains in Breaking Bad talk. They monologue, they threaten, they negotiate. Leonel and Marcos Salamanca do none of that. They just show up, and then somebody dies. The cousins are twin enforcers for Don Eladio's cartel, nephews of Hector Salamanca, and direct cousins to Tuco. They're around 28 to 29 during the events of Breaking Bad, and the show tracks their ages with weirdly specific precision across both series. The creators maintained an internal timeline for these two like they were filing their taxes, which is a strange amount of care to put into characters who have maybe 15 lines of dialogue combined, but that's the point. The show doesn't want you to think of them as people. It wants you to think of them as a natural disaster with matching suits. They move in perfect synchronization, they wear identical outfits, silver-tipped cowboy boots, and expressions that could best be described as nothing. They walk long distances on foot toward their targets, which logistically makes 0 sense, but the show isn't going for realism, it's going for dread. And it works. Every time the cousins appear on screen, they carry the energy of a horror movie antagonist. They're Michael Myers in bespoke tailoring, and then there's the Santa Muerte crawl. Before crossing the border to kill Walter White, both brothers drop to their knees and crawl through the dirt to a roadside shrine dedicated to the folk saint of death. The sequence is shot like a religious pilgrimage, which technically it is. They're asking for blessing before committing murder. It blurs the line between spiritual devotion and cartel ritual so completely that you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. It lasts maybe 2 minutes, and it's one of the most visually unforgettable sequences in the entire series. Here's where it gets complicated though, because the show also gives you a very specific reason for why they turned out this way. The flashback in 1 minute shows the twins as children visiting their uncle Hector. One of them tells Hector he wishes his brother was dead. So Hector shoves the kid's head into a bucket of water and holds it there while his twin watches. Then he pulls the kid out and delivers the lesson. Family is everything, and you never wish harm on family. Cool parenting moment there, Hector. Really nailed it. That scene reframes everything. Their brutality isn't innate, it's learned. They didn't become monsters on their own. They were built, but even monsters can fail. Their attempted assassination of Hank Schrader is one of the best action sequences in the entire show. They have every advantage. Hank is alone, unarmed, sitting in his car. One of them puts an axe through the windshield. It should be over in seconds. It isn't. Hank gets a warning call moments before and manages to throw his car into reverse, crushing one cousin between the vehicles. The other shoots him multiple times, then walks away to retrieve the axe for a finishing blow, because apparently a gun isn't dramatic enough. That pause gives Hank just enough time to grab the fallen cousin's weapon and fire a hollow point round through the surviving cousin's skull. For the first time in this series, the mythic, unstoppable killing machines turned out to be stoppable. Not because someone outsmarted them with a brilliant plan, but because a wounded man with a busted spine refused to stop fighting, which honestly makes them scarier in retrospect. Because if the cousins could fail, then the cartel's real power was never about individual enforcers. It was about having an endless supply of them. But if you think 2 silent assassins are terrifying, wait until you meet the man who sent them. A guy who runs a fried chicken restaurant by day and a drug empire by night, and somehow makes both look like the same job. Gus Fring. If Tuco Salamanca is a grenade with the pin pulled, Gustavo Fring is a nuclear warhead with a customer service smile. Gus is a Chilean-American fast food entrepreneur who owns and operates Los Pollos Hermanos, a beloved fried chicken chain across the Southwest. Excellent chicken, family-friendly atmosphere, community partnerships. He donates equipment to DEA offices. Let me say that again. The man running one of the largest meth distribution networks in the American Southwest donates equipment to the agency, whose entire job is catching people like him, and they thank him for it. Publicly, the Salamancas call him the Chicken Man, and they mean it as an insult, but it might be the most accurate nickname in television history, because that's exactly what he wants you to see. A guy who fusses over restaurant cleanliness and shakes hands with law enforcement like he's running for mayor. Every polite interaction, every charitable donation, every perfectly pressed shirt is a layer of armor designed to make you look somewhere else while he moves tens of millions of dollars worth of meth through a fast food logistics network. Where Tuco ran his operation like a guy having a permanent panic attack, Gus runs his like a Fortune 500 company. Supply chains, quality standards, an underground super lab with state-of-the-art equipment. He recruits Walter White specifically because Walt's product hits 99% purity, and Gus recognizes that as a competitive advantage. He doesn't yell, he doesn't threaten, he interviews you, hires you, gives you a workspace, and expects results. It's corporate America with a body count. But here's where it gets dark. The box cutter scene. One of his employees, Victor, has become a liability. Gus walks into the super lab. He doesn't say a word. He calmly removes his suit jacket, folds it neatly, puts on a protective suit, picks up a box cutter, and slashes Victor's throat open right in front of Walt and Jesse. Then he changes back into his clothes, adjusts himself, and tells them to get back to work. That's when the audience realizes something critical. Gus's politeness was never a limitation. It was a choice. Every calm conversation, every patient smile existed because he decided those people didn't need to die yet. The composure isn't mercy, it's total control over when and how he chooses to be violent. Now, his background. This is one of the most fascinating loose threads in television. When Gus first approaches the cartel as a younger man, Don Eladio murders his partner right in front of him, but lets Gus live. His exact words, that Gus is someone. The implication is that killing him would create problems with people powerful enough that even a cartel boss doesn't want the consequences. The most popular theory connects him to the Pinochet regime. Another puts him as a CIA asset. Nobody can verify anything about him before he arrived in Mexico. The show never confirms any of it, and honestly, the mystery is scarier than any answer could be. And then there's his death. Season 4 finale. Walter orchestrates a plan using Hector Salamanca, the one man whose hatred burns hot enough to agree to a suicide bombing. Hector triggers the explosive. The room detonates. And Gus walks out. He steps through the doorway, straightens his tie, and for one impossible second, he looks completely fine. Then the camera pans to reveal the other side of his face is gone. Half his skull is exposed. He adjusts his cuff and collapses dead. It's become one of the most iconic images in television history. Not because it's gory, although it absolutely is, but because even in death, Gus Fring tries to maintain composure. The tie straighten, the posture, the refusal to fall until his body physically gives out. That's not a man dying. That's a brand refusing to break. But if Gus represents the terrifying precision of organized evil, the next villain on this list represents something arguably worse. Someone with zero ideology, zero master plan, and zero hesitation. Tody D. Alquist. Every villain on this list so far has had a thing. Tuco screams, Gus calculates, the cousins stare. You can feel the danger radiating off them because they broadcast it. Todd Alquist does none of that. Todd smiles. Todd says yes sir and no ma'am. Todd holds the door open for you. And then Todd shoots a child in the desert without changing his facial expression. That's what makes him the single most skin-crawling character in the entire show. Here's the thing about Todd. He enters the story as basically a nobody. He's an employee of Vamonos Pest, the fumigation company Walt's crew uses as a front for mobile meth labs. He's polite, he's eager, he follows instructions. He's the kind of guy you describe as nice enough and then immediately forget about. But underneath that boy next door exterior is a complete void where a conscience should be. The moment that changes everything is the train heist. Walt, Jesse, and the crew pull off an elaborate scheme to steal methylamine from a freight train, and it works perfectly. Zero witnesses, clean getaway. Except a kid on a dirt bike named Drew Sharp happens to be out catching tarantulas and sees the whole thing. Before anyone can process what's happening, Todd pulls out a gun and shoots the boy dead. No hesitation, no visible distress. He just waves at the kid and then kills him. And then he keeps the boy's tarantula in a jar. He doesn't throw it away. He doesn't bury it with the body. He takes it home like a souvenir from a road trip. Gus would have killed the kid too, probably, but he would have understood the gravity of it. Todd treats it like checking a box on a to-do list. Kid saw us, kid's gone. Oh, cool, a spider. But the Drew Sharp murder isn't even Todd's worst moment. That belongs to what happens to Andrea, Jesse's girlfriend. Todd walks up to her doorstep, tells her Jesse sent him, and shoots her point blank, as punishment for Jesse trying to escape. Todd executes an innocent woman on her own porch the same way you'd return a library book, and the El Camino flashbacks somehow make it worse. We see Todd cheerfully inviting his chained captive Jesse to help with household errands, taking him along like they're buddies running Saturday morning chores. Meanwhile, Jesse is literally enslaved cooking meth under threat of death, watching Todd act like everything is perfectly normal. because for Todd, it is. There's no cruelty in his mind, there's no sadism, there's just tasks that need doing. That's the part that breaks people's brains. Every other villain on this list knows they're doing something wrong, or at least operates within a framework where violence has weight. Todd exists outside that framework entirely. He approaches murder the way most people approach mowing the lawn. You do it, you move on, you maybe whistle while you work. He's been voted the 5th most hated TV character of all time, across every show ever made. The surprise isn't that he's on the list. The surprise is that 4 characters somehow beat him. Todd also serves a critical structural role. He's the bridge between Walter's operation and Jack Welker's white supremacist gang. When Walt needs multiple prisoners killed simultaneously across several facilities, it's Todd's family connection to Uncle Jack that makes it possible. Todd participates in that coordinated massacre without blinking, because of course he does. More boxes to check, and that's what makes Todd the show's most direct engagement with a very uncomfortable idea, the banality of evil. The concept that the worst atrocities in human history weren't committed by cackling supervillains. They were committed by unremarkable people who followed orders, completed tasks, and went home for dinner. Todd doesn't monologue, he doesn't have a grand philosophy. He's just a polite young man who will kill absolutely anyone if the situation calls for it, and then ask if there's anything else you need, which is, not ideal. But if Todd makes your skin crawl as an individual, wait until you meet the family operation he comes from. Jack Welker. Every villain up to this point operated under some kind of logic that Walter could exploit. Tuco was unpredictable, but he wanted product. Gus was terrifying, but he respected competence. The cartel wanted money. Walter could always find an angle, a pressure point, a way to make his genius the most valuable thing in the room. Jack Welker doesn't care about any of that. Jack is the leader of a white supremacist gang, Todd's uncle, and the guy who takes absolutely everything from Walter White. His crew isn't a ragtag group of skinheads. This is an organized paramilitary network built inside the American prison system and exported into the outside world, and Walter invited them in. Here's the thing about Jack. He first proves his value by doing something nobody else could pull off. When Walter needs to eliminate every potential witness sitting in prison cells across the state, Jack coordinates the simultaneous murder of multiple inmates and their lawyer across several facilities, all within a 2-minute window. 2 minutes. Every single one of them dies on schedule. It's horrifying, efficient, and exactly what Walter asked for, which is, not ideal for Walter's moral scoreboard, but that's still Walter, holding the leash. The moment everything changes happens in the desert. Hank Schrader, Walter's brother-in-law, the DEA agent who spent years chasing Heisenberg without knowing he was sitting across from him at family barbecues, is on his knees with a gun pointed at his head. And Walter begs. He doesn't strategize, he doesn't negotiate from strength, he just begs. Offers Jack every dollar he has, $80 million in cash, buried right there in the sand. Jack shoots Hank anyway, not because he's angry, not because it's personal, because in Jack's world, you don't leave a federal agent alive after he's seen your face. That's gang principle. Walter's money means nothing against that code, and that's the gut punch of the entire series. Walter White, the man who outsmarted Gus Fring, who turned a high school chemistry lab into a drug empire, is on his knees screaming, and it doesn't change a single thing. Jack's crew then steals the majority of Walter's money, leaving him with a single barrel, and takes Jesse Pinkman as a prisoner, not a partner, a slave. They chain Jesse to a dog run in a concrete pit and force him to cook meth, using Todd as his handler. If Jesse tries to escape, they threaten to kill the people he loves. And they prove it when Todd murders Andrea on her front porch. This represents a genuine tonal shift in what kind of story Breaking Bad is telling. Up until Jack, the show's villainy was rooted in cartel dynamics and cross-border trafficking. Recognizable criminal ecosystems with internal rules. Jack's gang is ideologically motivated, prison-born, racially driven. They don't have business partners, they have subordinates and victims. The message is clear, this rot is homegrown. Walter eventually returns in the series finale with one of the most elaborate revenge setups in television history. He rigs an automated M60 machine gun in the trunk of his car and triggers it during a meeting at Jack's clubhouse. The gun tears through the walls and kills nearly everyone inside. Jack takes a round and bleeds out. Todd gets strangled by Jesse with his own chains. It's cathartic in the way only a series finale can be, but it comes far, far too late. Hank is dead. Andrea is dead. Jesse is broken. Walter's family is destroyed. The money is gone. Jack Welker proved something no other villain managed to prove. That Walter White's genius has limits. That there are people who don't respect intelligence, don't negotiate with wealth, and don't operate under any code Walter can decode. Jack simply took what he wanted and dared anyone to stop him. And for a long time, nobody could. But if Jack represents the external force that strips Walter of everything, the next entry is the one who made it all possible in the first place. The man who built the empire, invited the monsters in, and then had the audacity to act surprised when they bit. Walter White. Every villain we've talked about so far has one thing in common. They were obstacles. Dangerous, terrifying, brilliant obstacles, sure. But obstacles nonetheless. And here's what makes Breaking Bad the greatest show ever written. The whole time you were watching a man fight his way past those obstacles, you were actually watching a villain origin story. You just didn't know it yet. Walter White starts the series as a high school chemistry teacher, scraping by on a modest salary. He's overqualified, underpaid, and washing cars on the side. Then he gets diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and everything changes. But here's the thing. The cancer isn't what breaks Walter White. The cancer is just the excuse. Because the real wound happened decades earlier. Walt co-founded Gray Matter Technologies with Elliot Schwartz and Gretchen, a company that would eventually be worth billions. And Walt left. The exact circumstances are murky, tangled up in bruised egos and whatever happened between the three of them, but what matters is this. Walter White spent 2 decades believing he'd been cheated out of his legacy. That kind of resentment doesn't just sit there. It festers. It becomes the core of who you are. The cancer didn't create Heisenberg. The cancer just gave Walter permission to become who he'd always wanted to be. And once he starts, he doesn't stop. He manipulates Jesse Pinkman like a puppet, pulling him close when he needs loyalty, and discarding him when he becomes inconvenient. He watches Jane choke to death and does nothing, because her dying solved a problem. He poisons a child to manipulate Jesse into turning against Gus. He orchestrates a prison massacre, 10 witnesses killed across multiple facilities in a 2-minute window because loose ends made him nervous, and the whole time, he tells himself it's for his family. Now here's where it gets really interesting. There's a fan theory that Walter gradually absorbs traits from every person he kills. His patience starts mirroring Gus after Gus dies. His explosive violence echoes Tuco. His cold manipulation recalls every villain on this list. By season 5, Walter White isn't just one type of monster, he's all of them. The crawl space scene is the moment it all collapses. Walter scrambles under his house looking for the money he needs to disappear his family, and it's gone. Skyler gave it to Ted, and Walter, lying on his back in the dirt beneath his own home, starts laughing. Not a happy laugh. A broken, hysterical laugh that sounds like a man watching his last lie shatter in real time. The camera pulls up, framing him in that crawl space like a coffin, and the sound design shifts into something that belongs in a horror film. That's the exact second Walter White, the family man, dies. Whatever crawls out of that space isn't him anymore. But the moment that seals it, the one that confirms everything the audience spent 5 seasons trying to deny, is his final confession to Skyler. I did it for me, I liked it, I was good at it, and I was really alive. No justification, no rationalization, just the truth, delivered quietly in a kitchen, more devastating than any explosion the show ever produced. Every time Walter said I'm doing this for the family, he was lying. Maybe not at first, maybe in the very beginning there was a sliver of genuine desperation, but it curdled fast, and what replaced it was ego, pure and simple. By the series finale, Walter isn't fighting against the show's villains. He is the show's villain. Tuco, Gus, the cousins, Todd, Jack, every single one of them was a stepping stone. Each one represented a version of evil that Walter would eventually internalize and surpass. The cartel's violence, Gus's calculated control, Todd's detached cruelty, Jack's brute force. Walter absorbed all of it and wrapped it in a high school teacher's khakis. And that's Breaking Bad's greatest trick. It made you watch a villain origin story for 5 seasons and called it a hero's journey. You rooted for him. You wanted him to win. And by the time you realized what he'd become, you were already complicit. Every time you hoped he'd get away with it, you were doing exactly what Walter was doing. Rationalizing the inexcusable because the person doing it was someone you decided to care about. Not all stories have a moral, but this one does. And it's not a comfortable one. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.